Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Debug This Podcast, where we talk about life as a software engineer and in the tech industry. More about life, less about code. I'm Kevia Cloud. I'm here with Eddie SanMarco. What's up, Eddie?
What's up?
Uh, so, ironically, today we're actually going to talk about some code. But before we get into the series, we are continuing our How to Build a Software Engineering Championship team. We're going to talk about revisiting strategies and revisiting patterns. How important is that, Eddie? Like when we set a pattern in our coding standards, like how important is it to like go back and revisit some of these patterns?
I think it's more important than most people realize. Generally when you're in your code a lot and you're strategizing with your teammates about the type of patterns that you want to implement in your project, any processes that you want to implement. So patterns is not just code for us; it's also processes, and so we're going to be talking about that in this video as well. But in regards to coding and process, I guess revisiting those to make sure that they're still working is pretty valuable. Sometimes things will work for a little bit and then they just become cumbersome later. And so we're going to talk about that, how it affects our own lives in our daily work, and how we've done this process over and over again, and how it's affected us negatively or positively. So we're going to be doing that as well. But I think that having this conversation, at least thinking about this, is probably if you are thinking about this, if you are trying to work with this within your team, you're probably already in the right step. So we just want to get you past that, over the finish line, and give you some tips and some patterns that we have that allow you to kind of improve your processes throughout your career.
Yeah, and so a really good example of this is the Seattle Seahawks, right? So so I love Arizona. I'm in Arizona right now, obviously, but I'm from Washington, so I know the Seahawks way better than I do the Arizona Cardinals. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, all the fans out there. But so the Seahawks back in
Blasphemy.
so the Seahawks back in 2013, they this is a part of many strategies that they had, but one of the strategies they had was they had big cornerbacks, and what they would do is they would jam the wide receivers a little bit past the 5 yard line, and what they did was they tried to see if they can get away with as much as they could. So anything before the 5 yard line is free game. You can press up on the wide receiver, but after that it's a penalty. But they were getting away with a lot of stuff. They're jamming receivers well past that, like at the 7-8 yard mark, and that actually really helped their secondary because I mean, you can even go back to the stats. The 2013 Seahawks were like one of the best defenses out there.
Yeah.
But obviously they had to go back and revisit those patterns because I think the league caught on. All the other teams, they caught on and they started doing different routes, and they caught on to that pattern and they countered it. You know what I mean? So,
Yep.
they knew the game plan. They knew what the Seahawks were about. They knew they were going to keep jamming them past that. And I think also the referees got caught on to it a little bit too because they started getting penalized a little more. But that pattern or that strategy didn't work anymore. And, they had personnel changes too. But, so if you imagine if they would have just kept using that same pattern, so, they had to go back and revisit that strategy because it didn't work anymore,
Yep.
So it worked in 2013, and I think it kind of overflowed over to 2014. But then in 2015, it was pretty much done. So as developers and software engineers, we have to do the same thing because we get better as developers, and we have to look back at our old patterns, and we can't get comfortable because if we get comfortable, you're not going to get better. You know what I mean? So
Right. Well, I think a lot of times, though, when you're in the code, we're talking about just specifically the code patterns changing. It's a little bit easier than processes, just because code changes all the time, and I think that we're constantly iterating anyway. So as we do so, as new things are updated, we can go in there and code ourselves out of bad patterns that we thought maybe would have helped us, but maybe it doesn't help us so much, right? That specific structure of code that we thought was going to be great, maybe it doesn't help us. And so as software evolves, we go in there and we update those. So, but it's good practice to just revisit that code, even if something hasn't changed. And it's also these tips that we're going to be giving you guys today, I think, that are going to help you translate revisiting stuff for processes as well, and it'll make you and your team a lot more efficient for sure.
Yeah. So today we have two examples, actually, Eddie. We didn't mention this earlier, but we should probably talk about, you remember how we used to make subtasks for like code reviews?
Yep.
You remember that? So at first we thought that's going to help the process, but then we found that we revisited and we was like, hey, this is actually more cumbersome and annoying, if anything. So
yeah, so our process on that was like, hey, we have our story and we have we create subtasks so that we can assign people code reviews for our pull requests, which seemed like a good idea at the time because we're like, okay, we're going to have accountability for who's going to be on the pull request, plus we can log our time against those subtasks and not have to bloat up the original story with work that the original assignee didn't do. Mm-hmm. So that was great, in concept. But when we started to implement it, what we realized is that we just created an extra step for the code reviewers to make sure that they assign themselves to the subtasks and then log time against those subtasks. And people would forget, and it was just a cumbersome process that we decided later on, okay, let's ditch this because we can, the people who are assigned to the pull requests, that's how you keep them accountable because their name is attached to the approvals of the pull request, A. And B, we can just log the time against the ticket and actually who cares because it's not that big of a deal. What are we talking about here? At max an hour or an hour and a half for the review, the stuff that we usually push up is generally kind of small. We do that on purpose so that we're not spending our entire lives code reviewing others. And so that was also a pattern that we had to implement in the beginning of this process as well. So we could talk about that too if you think it's interesting, Kevia. But yeah, for sure.
Well, it's interesting, but you pretty much just talked about it. Like
I guess
that was it right there. No, that was it. And so what we found is like it was wasting more time. Right. It was just for like a small change. We had to go hit that developer, and that developer was probably already knee deep in their own code too. So
yeah. You derail everybody. Sometimes those changes are one-liner, and you have to derail somebody just to assign themselves a subtask. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So we got rid of that. We even went into the Confluence and just got rid of it. We're like, we need to just get rid of this thing, and that it's like all remnants of it either because it was really really annoying at after a while. We were doing that for a while. So I think maybe a month or two, or maybe 2 months or something like that.
I think it was about 2 months. But I think you touched on something there real quick, where the Confluence docs. So we create Confluence docs for all of our processes so that when we do revisit these patterns, we can then say, hey, this is our exact process that we talked about 2 months ago. Because if you're not going to document them, then you're not going to remember all the details of that process 2 months later when you're like, let's revisit it, right? So just please make sure you document your processes along with your code patterns and like what style you want. Basically create your own style sheet or style guide for coding patterns and processes so that when you do revisit it, you can do, like Kevia just said, we just took it out of the Confluence doc, so that's no longer part of the process, but we don't have to lose any information because we documented it.
Yeah. And so we weren't even talking about this today, but if you're going to do it together too, because I think we all went into a room and we knock out these processes, and I think doing it together, you really flesh out and really streamline some of these processes as a team. So it's not just one person like the lead writing the documents. You know what I mean? So it's everybody involved because we'll talk about these processes and then we'll say, well, you know what? That doesn't really sound like it's really conducive to productivity. Let's not even put that in there.
Right. And everybody has to work on them, right? So some people are going to have ideas on how to make some processes more streamlined. Other people may say, well, you know what? This doesn't work for me because X, Y, Z. And if there's a really good reason for it, then there's no reason not to change it,
Yeah. So that's revisiting a pattern in process. So next we're going to talk about a pattern that we came across that we use here in code. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, and this is the first time we ever done this. So we're going to see how well this works, and if it's great, we're going to continue. But I know we said more about life and less about code, but ironically, here we go. So this is a common pattern that you'll run into as a developer is you'll have a set of conditions that you're checking to do some logic. And if it doesn't fulfill that condition, you do something else. So here's an example. We have a payment info and we're checking multiple properties on this object. We're saying, hey, payment type, if it's credit card and the card is set and it's authorized, do something, continue with the payment, or otherwise go fetch the the payment info or do a loading screen or whatever you need to do on that else. And what we found was during code reviews, readability, sometimes, this doesn't really jump out at you. Sometimes you can lose the intent. I can go through here and I can sort of figure it out. But if I'm on my own code and I come in to do a PR, I need that readability to be quick. And sometimes the intent here can be lost. And these things can get really crazy. It might make sense to you as you're coding at that moment, but somebody who has to jump in and do a PR, it might not immediately jump out. So we found that encapsulating certain conditions actually helps with readability. And this is a pattern that we picked up. So I'm going to erase this. And here's a free plug for Alfred. Alfred's really, really great because you can save a ton of, clipboard copy paste things. So I took that other piece of code here where we're doing like a logic check in the if conditional, and we encapsulate it into one variable here. And also, if you're unfamiliar, this is deconstructing, which is a beautiful pattern that we use, which I highly, highly recommend. So we pulled each property that we're going to use out into its own variable, and we're doing the check here. And what we did was we actually did the check outside of the if, and we put the intent here. This is what really makes it readable, is we put what we're actually doing or what's the intent of this condition into a variable. And this could be long. You don't have to limit yourself to a short variable name. I think sometimes, I don't know where this comes from, but developers think that, variables have to be, short and clever. But I mean, these things could be long and verbose. And that's another pattern that we adopted here. Like this could be a sentence, is payment ready from customer? It could be anything. It could be a whole thing,
Because the whole purpose of doing this is to make it readable for your reviewer. Because if you can make this unlegible if you'd like, and because who cares, right? Because computers read code differently. But for people, for us, we want to see. Yeah, that's what we don't really. If you're not looking at the constant there, and you're only looking at the condition, you have no idea what that actually translates to. So we're trying to make it readable for the whoever's reviewing your pull request, as well as any developers that are going to be in this code later on. And for you, by the way, because you're not going to know what the hell X is, 6 months from now.
Oops, misspelled that. There we go. All right, is payment ready for customer? So anyway, this could be anything, and this, like Eddie mentioned, even a month from now. I mean, a code is complex. Even a month, are you going to come back and understand what X was? No. But if you come back and you look at, is payment ready from customer? Oh, okay, yeah, I get that, And as a reviewer, if I see that the code is working, sometimes I don't even, there's some trust that comes in here, obviously, when you're working with other software engineers, there is some trust. I could look at over here and just, sort of glance and see what's going on, but I'm looking at this. Is payment ready? Go in here. Oh, okay, I see what's happening, right? That's really easy for me. If I pull the code down and it's working as it should, then I know that I can trust this right here. And then the intent is it's checking, some conditionals coming from the server, doing some, like positive checks, so I can come in here and just really read that really quickly and continue. And you got to remember, I'm doing this, I don't know what, for 30, how long are PRs? Usually 15, 30 minutes. So if I'm going through this code like this, I can continue and continue pretty quickly and, and then get back to my own code.
And what we did here is if you guys can see, is not reducing the amount of code. It's actually increasing a little bit of the amount of code that we're doing. But that's not the point of this process. The point is to make it more readable for other developers and yourself for later on. This pattern we actually implement across the application, the main application that we work on. It makes it really easy for us to go in and look at these conditions, especially if we're utilizing these conditions in multiple places in the components that we're building. For us to have to rewrite that condition on line 11 without declaring it into a variable inside if else's all over the page, that is definitely going to increase the size or the amount of code that we have to write. It's also pretty bloated. Also, if we are making any changes to those conditions, we have to do them across the entire component versus just when we declare it. So there's a lot of forward thinking in regards to doing these type of patterns, as well as making them super legible for us to just kind of skim through.
And here I'm just doing sort of an example, but now within that if, we can do some other check also, some other super long check where, is payment ready from customer, and then we do some other check. Because could you imagine if we had, another long check inside of that? If we were like this and we're doing that. I mean, right away you can already tell that hurts the eyes. It's very hard for me to understand what's happening, but we go in here and it reads almost like so this is the part where I think software engineering meets art, or like almost like poetry. You know what I mean? Like this reads like a book or a novel. You come in, it's payment ready from customer, and then some other check. And a lot of our code reads very, very well like this, like sentences and like a story almost. And so I think we proud ourselves on that, like mixing software engineering with art.
And if you're the type of developer who gets really scared about using long, verbose variable names, then just give it a shot. Try to make them maybe not as long, maybe make them just kind of shorter. Instead of saying is payment ready from customer, maybe the variable name is payment ready. Whatever is going to make sense to you guys. And just what we're trying to kind of convey here is that we're to make it legible, to make it readable for you, to other people. It doesn't have to be super verbose, like Kevia said, but I think that this will help you in the long run for sure. So just give it a shot. The worst case scenario is that you revert it and it's no big deal.
Yeah, and you know what? And this can also be scrutinized too, because maybe later we'll come back and find a better pattern. So far we haven't, but we don't just set it in stone. We don't just say, hey, this is the best and that's it. We do come back and say, is this still good? Is it still valid? Does it still hold true? And so far it has. But we don't just set it in stone and never visit it again.
And if you guys got some suggestions as well, we would love to hear it. Just like this whole video, revisiting old patterns or maybe new patterns, revisiting those. Let me switch things. When we do these videos, we're always thinking about what's the next best thing anyway. So if you guys have suggestions for us to try to implement in our own code, we'll definitely at least try it and see if it's going to be beneficial for us. And if it is, great, we'll give you guys a shout out on our next video.
Oh yeah. Well, I guess that's a part of revisiting patterns too, is having that open mind, right?
Yep.
I know sometimes it's hard. I think, especially when you suggested a pattern and then it gets, I guess, revisited. Sometimes you may feel like you're getting attacked, but it's really not the case, right? It's like, hey, I think we found a better pattern and we need to implement, and that's better for the team. So, you really, sometimes you gotta really take your ego out of it and just understand, have open mind. You're getting better. Your teammates are getting better. Everybody's getting better. Every day you come in and you code, you're getting better. And so you're going to look back at your pattern and say, hey, you know what? I think we found something better. With that being said, just to kind of go back to what we're saying is, just revisit your patterns, making sure your strategies offensively and defensively, just like the 2013 Seahawks, making sure that the patterns and strategies you're using are still effective and they're still good. And now you have a better lens later on as you're getting better as a developer. You're going to look back and you have a better lens. You have more experience to look at that code and say, hey, you know what, this might not be as good as I thought it was. And so, you discuss it with your team and then you change it up. So, going back, revisiting patterns, making sure your strategy is still top notch and cutting edge. Any closing remarks, Eddie?
I just want to buttress what Kevia was saying earlier, where you really should check your ego at the door. I try to do that. It's hard sometimes because when you write code, especially if it's complex code that you're proud of and that you worked really hard on, and maybe you had to overcome some obstacles with making that piece of functionality work properly, it becomes your baby, and you don't want. Yeah, and you
that's
don't
a good term to use too. It's your baby. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really is. You get attached to it, and you get really proud of that piece of functionality. And I think that at the end of the day, what's best for the project, what's best for the team, has to supersede a piece of functionality that you built 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever. Especially in this industry, especially in front end, because it changes all the time. You just got to get used to that. And so, it's only going to help your career in the long run because you're going to learn new ways of coding, and that's always great. Even if it doesn't apply to every piece of code that you write, learning new functionality, learning new ways of coding, learning new ways to make your code more readable is definitely going to help your career. It's going to make your team happy because they're doing less. They're having to spend less time on doing code reviews. If you're a team lead, that's great because you want your team to be working on actual code and not on reviewing other people's stuff. You know,
it's the cognitive load.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's less cognitive load because like we're already doing a lot of complex stuff, and so you know if you have these great patterns in there, it helps with that. You know, it's like it's less horsepower I would have to use, you know, on the PR, and I can get back to my code.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that being said, thanks for joining us. Debug This Podcast. If you've missed any of our other series, please go back and check it out, especially the interview we did 2 weeks ago. It's great. I'm Kevia Cloud. Eddie SanMarco. We're checking out. See you guys later. Thank you.
Come again.